My son told the security guard at the front door that he had never seen me before in his life. He didn't whisper it. He didn't hesitate. He looked straight through me the way you look through a window you've forgotten is there, and he said it loud enough for the woman standing next to him to hear every syllable. The woman in the floor-length emerald gown who would be his wife in 6 weeks. The woman whose family owned half the shoreline property in Lake County. The woman he had chosen over every blood bond he had ever been given. I didn't say a word. I turned around, walked back through the brass-framed doors of the Meridian Grand Hotel, and sat down in my truck in the parking garage. It was a 2004 Ford pickup, with a cracked dashboard and a heater that worked on good days. I sat there with the engine running for about 4 minutes. Then I took out my phone and made one call. By the time the appetizers were cleared, Michael Hargrove's perfect evening had already begun to die. My name is Thomas Hargrove. Most people who know me call me Tom. I am 64 years old. I have the kind of hands that embarrass people at fancy dinners, broad and scarred, permanently stained at the knuckles from 40 years of electrical work in commercial buildings. I wear the same brand of flannel shirt I have worn since 1987. I drive a truck that my son once called a monument to giving up. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house on the edge of Ridgefield, Illinois, a house I built myself over the course of 2 summers after my wife Patricia passed. It is not a mansion. It is not impressive. It is exactly where I want to be. What Michael never bothered to find out, because asking questions about my life stopped interesting him around the time he enrolled at Northwestern on a partial scholarship. I quietly topped off was that I sold Hargrove Electrical Contracting 11 years ago for $11.4 million. I had built the company from a single van and a box of tools into a 40-person operation that wired half the commercial buildings in the Chicago metro area. I had run it lean and smart for 3 decades, paid my people well, and kept my name off the brass plaques. When I sold, I didn't buy a boat or a condo in Florida. I put the money into a management trust, bought several properties around the city, and kept driving the same truck. I am not secretive about money because I am ashamed of it. I am quiet about it because I learned early that wealth announced itself in one of 2 ways. It either built things or it attracted people who wanted to take from what you had built. Michael had somehow become the second kind of person. I was not entirely sure when it happened. I suspected it had something to do with Victoria. He had been a good kid, serious, a little quiet, drove himself hard. He worked summers with me on job sites when he was in high school, learned how to read a circuit diagram and respect a foreman. Then he went to college and found a different version of himself, polished and eager, one that wore collared shirts and studied his reflection before walking into rooms. When he graduated and took a position at an investment consulting firm in the city, I was proud. When he started dating Victoria Ashworth 2 years later, I tried to be. The Ashworths were the kind of family whose name appeared on hospital wings and university libraries. Victoria's father, Randall, ran the Ashworth Foundation, a philanthropic organization that raised money for children's literacy programs across the Midwest. They threw an annual gala, the Foundation Gala, at the Meridian Grand every spring. It was black tie. It was invitation only. The ticket price for a table was $15,000, and the waiting list was 2 years long. Michael had told me about the gala in February. He was going to be honored. The foundation was giving him a Rising Philanthropist Award for organizing a fundraising campaign at his firm that had raised $200,000 for the literacy program. He had sounded genuinely excited on the phone, more like the son I knew than he had been in a while. I told him I was proud of him. I told him I would be there. There was a silence that lasted just a half-second too long. He said he would put me on the guest list. He did not put me on the guest list. I found this out when I arrived at the Meridian Grand on the night of May 17th in my best sport coat and the good dark slacks Patricia had bought me years ago, and stood at the guest check-in table while a young woman with a headset scrolled through her tablet 3 times and told me, politely, apologetically, that my name was not there. I stepped to the side. I called Michael's cell phone. He answered on the 3rd ring, which told me he had been watching the screen decide whether to pick up. I told him there was a problem with the guest list. He said he would come take care of it. He appeared 2 minutes later through the ballroom doors with Victoria on his arm, and I watched his expression run through 4 distinct stages: recognition, calculation, something close to panic, and then a coldness I had never seen on his face before. He walked up to the check-in table. The security attendant, a large man in a dark suit, asked if I was a guest of Mr. Hargrove's. Michael looked at me for 1 second. Then he looked at the attendant. "I don't know this man," he said. "I think he may have followed someone in from the street." Victoria touched his arm and smiled at the attendant the way people smile when they want a problem handled without having to witness the handling of it. I stood there. I heard the words. I heard each one clearly and individually, the way you hear things when the world goes briefly quiet around you. I nodded once, turned, and walked out. I sat in the parking garage with the engine running and the heat on low, and I thought about Michael at 11 years old, riding on my shoulders at a 4th of July parade because the crowd was too thick for him to see. I thought about the night I sat in a plastic chair in a hospital hallway for 6 hours while they operated on his appendix. I thought about the letter I wrote him when he graduated from Northwestern, 4 handwritten pages I had worked on for 2 weeks, because I wanted him to know exactly what he had meant to me and exactly what I believed he was capable of becoming. Then I thought about his face at the check-in table, and I picked up the phone. I called Gerald Marsh. Gerald was not just my attorney. He had been my attorney since I incorporated Hargrove Electrical in 1991. He had handled the sale. He had helped me structure the trust. He had drafted the documents for every real estate acquisition I had made in the 11 years since. He was, as he liked to say, the man who kept the lights on in my financial life, which he thought was funny given my background. He answered on the first ring. "Tom," he said, "the gala should be starting. What's wrong?" "Pull the Meridian file," I said. A pause. The sound of a chair adjusting. "Tom." "Pull it, Gerald." I heard him typing. The Meridian Grand Hotel occupied a 22-story tower in the loop that had been developed in 2009 by a group of investors who ran short of capital during the build-out. I had provided bridge financing through the trust and taken a 31% equity stake in the property management company that operated the building. The arrangement had been structured quietly. My name appeared nowhere in the hotel's marketing materials. I also happened to be the single largest anonymous donor to the Ashworth Foundation. I had contributed $400,000 over the past 3 years through a donor-designated fund administered by Gerald's firm. The contributions had been made under a clause that gave the donor the right to withdraw all pledged future giving if the donor was publicly misidentified, excluded from foundation events, or treated with deliberate disrespect by foundation leadership or their immediate family. Victoria's father, Randall, had signed the clause himself. He had never asked who the anonymous donor was. Wealthy foundations rarely ask questions about large anonymous gifts. It is considered bad form. "I want to activate the donor withdrawal," I said. "All of it. The pledged contribution for next year, the matching grant for the capital campaign, everything in the pipeline." Gerald was quiet for a moment. "That's $260,000 in committed funding, Tom. I know what it is. The foundation will be blindsided. The gala is happening right now. I know when the gala is happening." Another pause. Then, carefully, "What happened?" I told him. 14 seconds. Gerald had known me for 30 years. He understood the weight of what I was describing without requiring elaboration. "All right," he said quietly. "I am going to need you to confirm this in writing. Even a text to my number will do. And then I am going to make 2 calls. One to the foundation's executive director, one to the hotel's general manager." "Make the hotel call first," I said. "I want the ballroom to go dark before they serve the main course." Gerald made a sound that was not quite a laugh. "You are aware that you can't actually cut power to the ballroom. That would be a safety issue. I don't want the power cut. I want the service contract suspended. Food service, bar service, event staff. My equity stake carries a material adverse change clause in the operating agreement. If the hotel's management creates a guest incident or fails to perform due diligence on event attendees, I can trigger a capital review that freezes discretionary spending. Tell the general manager I am initiating a capital review and that all vendor payments for tonight's event are being held pending audit." Silence. "Gerald," I said, "is the language in the contract?" "Yes," he said. "Yes, it is." "Then make the call." I hung up. I leaned my head back against the seat of my truck and looked at the concrete ceiling of the parking garage. Level 3, spot 47. I had been in this garage before. I had been in this hotel before, many times, for board meetings and annual reviews, always in the side entrance, always in whatever the opposite of a grand entrance was. My son was upstairs right now, eating food I had indirectly paid for, in a building I partially owned, being celebrated for his generosity by a foundation my money had helped sustain, while a security guard was probably already flagging my description at the front door in case I tried to come back. I thought about driving home. I thought about pouring a glass of bourbon and watching baseball and letting the whole thing settle into the category of things that had simply happened. I am old enough to know that not every wound needs to be surgically examined. Some you just carry. But I thought about what carrying this one would mean. It would mean that Michael would wake up tomorrow, and the story he told himself about that moment would be the only version that existed. He would tell himself he had handled a difficult situation. He would tell himself his father had understood, or that his father hadn't mattered enough for understanding to be required. He would keep building his polished life on a foundation that had a hairline fracture running straight through the middle of it, and the fracture would widen, and one day something very heavy would cross it. I was not doing this for myself. I had stopped lying to myself about that in the parking garage. I was doing this because a building with a bad foundation does not just fall on the builder. It falls on everyone inside it. I drove out of the garage into an all-night diner 3 blocks away and ordered coffee and waited. Gerald called back in 22 minutes. "The general manager is not happy," he said. "The general manager works for a board that includes my equity stake," I said. "He understands that now. Food service is being halted. The bar is closed. The event staff has been told that the event contract is under review, and they are to begin clearing service items from the tables. He is going to make an announcement." "What about the foundation?" "The executive director received my letter by email 6 minutes ago. She has not called back yet. She will." "And the donor withdrawal?" "Formally executed. $260,000. The foundation's capital campaign loses its anchor match. Their board will know by morning." I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup. It was cheap diner coffee, bitter and hot, and it tasted exactly right. "There is one more thing," I said. "I need you to send me the file on Randall Ashworth. The one Reynolds put together. 3 weeks earlier, I had hired a private investigator named Reynolds, the same man I had used twice before for background checks on potential business partners. I had asked him to look into the Ashworth family. Not because I was looking for ammunition. I had asked because Michael had mentioned, in an offhand way that was clearly not offhand, that Randall was interested in having a private meeting about estate planning, and that Michael had suggested I might be someone worth knowing. I had been around enough people who wanted to know me for reasons that had nothing to do with me to recognize when I was being appraised. Reynolds had come back to me with a report that I had read once, set aside, and hoped I would never need to use. Gerald messaged me the file. I read it in the parking lot of the diner while my coffee went cold. Randall Ashworth's family money was not what it appeared to be. His grandfather had built a modest regional insurance company that had been sold in the 1970s, which had generated genuine generational wealth. But Randall had spent the better part of 2 decades quietly diminishing it through a combination of bad investments and a structured giving vehicle that Reynolds described, carefully, as appearing to direct a significant percentage of public donations toward administrative expenses that flowed back to Ashworth-controlled entities. The Foundation's tax filings, which were public record, showed a pattern that the Illinois Attorney General's office had apparently been reviewing for 14 months. Randall Ashworth was not under indictment, but he was, according to a source Reynolds had cultivated in a federal contractor's office, the subject of a civil investigation that his own attorneys had been negotiating quietly for nearly a year. The Foundation's gala, the one happening right now at the Meridian Grand, was its primary annual fundraising event. This year's goal was $400,000. My withdrawal of the anchor match had just cut that target in half before a fork had been lifted. I thought about Michael upstairs, holding his award, standing next to the man whose family he had chosen over his own. I thought about what it means to choose a family you don't know over a family you do. Then I turned the truck back toward the hotel. I did not go inside. I parked in the street across from the entrance and opened my phone's camera and watched. I didn't need a security feed tonight. I could see the front doors from where I sat, and within 40 minutes, Those doors began to open in a way that gala doors do not open until the very end of the night. People came out in small groups, women in gowns checking their phones, men in tuxedos with the particular expression of people who have been denied something they paid for. Two catering vans parked at the service entrance sat idle with their loading doors open. The lobby, visible through the front glass, had the unmistakable quality of a party that had stopped. My phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. I answered, "Is this Thomas Hargrove?" A woman's voice, controlled and professional with a tight edge of strain underneath it. Speaking. "Mr. Hargrove, my name is Carol Devine. I am the executive director of the Ashworth Foundation. I received correspondence from your attorney this evening indicating a withdrawal of donor commitments. I was hoping we could speak directly." "Of course," I said. "Mr. Hargrove, I want to assure you that whatever has prompted this decision, we are committed to making it right. Your contributions have been central to our work with children's literacy programs across 6 counties. If there has been an incident this evening—" "There was an incident," I said. "I was denied entry to an event at which I was an invited guest." A pause. "I understand. I need to be transparent with you. The guest list for the gala is managed by the Ashworth family directly. The foundation board does not control." "Miss Devine," I said, "I don't hold you personally responsible. I hold the organization responsible, and the organization is governed by a clause in my giving agreement, which your legal team signed. The clause has been triggered. The withdrawal stands." Another pause. Longer. "May I ask how you heard about the Capital Review at the hotel?" "I am a partial equity holder in the building," I said. "Good evening, Miss Devine." I hung up. I watched the front doors. I was looking for Michael. He came out 20 minutes later. He had his jacket over his arm and his tie loosened, and he was moving with the quick, controlled walk of someone trying to look unhurried while being furious. Victoria was beside him, her hand on his arm, speaking quietly. Her father, Randall, was 2 steps behind, his face the color of old cement. Michael stopped at the top of the front steps. He looked out at the street, and I watched him scan the parked cars the way you scan a crowd when you're looking for something specific. His eyes passed over my truck without stopping. He had never paid enough attention to my truck to recognize it from a distance. Victoria said something. Michael turned to Randall. The 3 of them stood there under the hotel canopy for almost 2 minutes, and I watched the conversation go from controlled to less controlled. Randall was on his phone. Victoria was looking at her own phone, and whatever she was reading was making her jaw tighten in a way that had nothing to do with disappointment and everything to do with calculation. Michael's phone rang. He answered it. I watched him go very still. He had just found out, I assumed, that the anonymous donor who had withdrawn $260,000 from his future father-in-law's foundation was his own father. He looked at the street again. This time his eyes stopped on my truck. I watched him say something to Victoria. She shook her head. He said it again, and whatever his face was doing was enough to make her step back. He walked down the steps and across the sidewalk and into the street. He was still holding his award, a small crystal cube on a black base, and it caught the streetlight as he walked. He knocked on the passenger window. I unlocked the door. He got in. We sat in silence for 10 seconds. The award sat in his lap. Up close, in the dim interior of the truck, he looked younger than I had seen him look in years. He also looked like a man who had just watched several floors of a building he thought was solid shift underneath him. "You own part of the hotel," he said. "Not a question." 31% equity stake, I said. "Held through the Hargrove Management Trust since 2012. He looked at the dashboard. "And the foundation?" "Anonymous donor. 3 years. The giving agreement included a conduct clause." "You set that up on purpose." His voice had a quality I couldn't quite categorize. Not quite anger. Something that lives in the neighborhood of anger but runs a little deeper. "I set it up because that is how I structure significant giving. Accountability provisions protect the donor and the organization. Gerald has used the same language in every charitable commitment I have made in the last decade. Did you know," he said carefully, "that I was going to be at this event? I knew, and you waited until I was there. I waited until I was turned away at the door, and you told a security attendant that you had never seen me before." He closed his eyes. Outside, a cab pulled up to the hotel entrance. Two women in gowns got in. Victoria's family, he started. I know about Victoria's family, I said. More than you do, I suspect. He looked at me. I reached into the center console and took out a folded summary sheet. 1 page. I had printed it at the diner. I held it out to him. He took it slowly, the way you take something when you're not sure you want to see what's on it. He read it in the orange light of the street lamp. I watched his face move through the information. Employment history, Randall's, financial disclosures, the AG review. The word investigation appeared twice on the page, and each time his jaw tightened fractionally. This is real, he said. Reynolds doesn't deliver anything that isn't verified through at least 2 sources. You hired a private investigator on my fiancé's family. I hired a private investigator on a man who sent his future son-in-law to arrange a private meeting about my estate. Yes. Michael put the page down on the dashboard. He looked at it for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. She told me you'd embarrass her family, he said quietly. She said her parents were very particular about appearances, that they had worked hard to build a certain reputation, and that any association with he stopped. With someone who looks like me, I said. He didn't answer, which was its own kind of answer. I have sat across from Randall Ashworth at a foundation board dinner, I said. Twice. He shook my hand. He thanked me. He had no idea who I was. He saw a man in good clothes at a charity event and treated me accordingly. Do you understand what I am telling you? Michael looked out the windshield. The version of me that exists in your mind, I said, and apparently in whatever story you have told Victoria's family, is not the version of me that exists in the world. You have decided who I am based on my truck and my hands and the house I live in, and you have made decisions accordingly. You have made a decision tonight in front of a security guard and a woman you are going to marry that you cannot take back. Dad, I am not finished. I kept my voice level. I had been keeping it level since the parking garage, and it was not difficult, because what I felt was not anger. It was something much quieter and much more permanent than anger. I sold Hargrove Electrical for $11.4 million. I own 4 properties in this city. I am the primary note holder on a commercial development in the West Loop that will complete in 14 months. I am not a wealthy man in the way that Randall Ashworth performs wealth, but I am a man who has built things that will stand after I am gone. And I live the way I live because the house I live in is where your mother lived, and the truck I drive still runs, and I do not need a different truck to know what I am worth. He was very still. You have been telling yourself a story, I said. The story where your father is a liability. The story where the life you came from is something to be managed, something to be kept off the guest list. And I want you to understand that I know exactly when that story started. He looked at me then. It started when Victoria told you it was true, I said. And you believed her because she was standing in a room that looked like the kind of room you had always wanted to be in. His throat moved. He looked out the windshield again. Down the street, the hotel doors opened once more, and more people filtered out. The gala was emptying. I don't know what to say, he said. I know you don't. That is why I'm the one talking. I reached into the glove compartment and took out an envelope. It was a plain white envelope with his name written on the front in my handwriting. This is what happens next. He took it. He looked at it without opening it. Inside that envelope is the address of a property I own on the north side. 2 flat, fully occupied, needs a building manager. The apartment on the ground floor is vacant. 1 bedroom, heat included, month-to-month lease. The job pays $19 an hour. You will collect rents, coordinate maintenance, handle tenant communications, and report to my property manager, a woman named Joyce, who has been with me for 8 years and has no patience for people who think they are too good for the work. He was very still. You have 30 days to give notice at your current job, I said, which I recommend you do before Randall Ashworth's legal situation becomes public, because your firm's association with the foundation will become a liability faster than you think. Joyce will expect you on the 1st of July. You want me to manage a building, he said. I want you to learn what it costs to keep a building standing, I said. I want you to know what a busted water heater at 2 in the morning feels like from the side of the phone where you have to answer it. I want you to understand that the people who live in the properties I own are not abstractions. They are families. Some of them have been in those buildings for 15 years. They trusted me to keep the heat on, and the elevators running, and the common areas clean. I have never once let them down. He looked at the envelope. He turned it over once. And if I say no, he said, then you say no. You go back to Victoria and her father, and you build whatever you are building with them. The door is not locked, but understand that if you walk through it in that direction, you are walking away from the trust, from the inheritance, from everything I have spent 40 years building to leave to someone who knew its value. You will be choosing a family that does not exist over a family that does. He sat with that. A full minute went by. Outside, a couple walked past the truck laughing about something, oblivious, their evening intact. Victoria is going to be furious, he said. Yes, I said. She will be. She's going to tell me I chose my father over her. You will have. You should consider whether that is the correct order of things. He looked at the Crystal Award in his lap. The Rising Philanthropist Award, given by a foundation whose finances were under investigation for raising money for children who genuinely needed it, at an event paid for, in part by a man who had just been told by his son that he did not exist. He set the award on the dashboard. He opened the envelope. He read the address inside. He read the job description, which I had typed up myself. 3 paragraphs, no flourishes. He folded it and put it back. My mother would be ashamed of me, he said. It was not a question, and it was not said to prompt a response. It was just a thing he needed to say out loud. Your mother believed that the measure of a person was not who they were in good rooms, I said. It was who they were in parking garages. He was quiet for a long time after that, long enough that I thought he might be done talking. Then he said, when I was 16, you remember the summer I worked the Bellamy Center job with you? I remember. There was a foreman, Pete something, Pete Chirone. He called you by your first name in front of the crew. Every other guy called you Mr. Hargrove, and you never corrected him. I asked you about it later, and you said something I didn't understand at the time. He paused. You said the men who need the title are usually the ones who don't have the authority. I didn't say anything. I have been trying to get the title, he said. I have been trying to get the room. I have been trying to be the kind of person who gets called Mr. Hargrove. I know, I said, and somewhere in there I started thinking you were Pete Cerrone. I looked at my hands on the steering wheel, the same hands he had described differently, to a security attendant, an hour ago. I will take the job, he said. I will give notice Monday. I nodded. Dad. He looked at me directly for the first time since getting in the truck. I am sorry for what I said tonight. I am sorry for what I have been saying, and not saying, for a long time. I reached over and put my hand on the back of his neck the way I used to when he was a kid and needed steadying. I know that too, I said. He got out of the truck. He stood on the curb for a moment, holding the envelope and looking back at the hotel entrance, where Victoria was now visible through the glass lobby doors, speaking on her phone with the alert, assessing posture of someone managing a crisis. He did not go back inside. He started walking down the block in the direction of the train station, his good shoes on the concrete, his tie loose, his award left on my dashboard. I watched him go until I couldn't see him anymore. Then I started the truck. The 1st of July came with a heat wave. I drove past the North Side building at 7 in the morning on his first day, slowly, from the opposite side of the street. I did not stop. I did not want him to see me. He was already there. He was on the front steps with Joyce, who was showing him something on her clipboard. He was wearing work clothes. Not the flannel I grew up in, but close enough. Jeans, boots, a plain shirt. He was writing something down. He was paying attention. Joyce was pointing at the window frames on the 2nd floor, and I knew what she was pointing at because I had been meaning to have those frames recaulked for 2 seasons. He was nodding. He was writing it down. I drove past without stopping and went home and made coffee and sat on the back porch in the July heat and felt something I had not let myself feel since May 17th. It wasn't forgiveness exactly. Forgiveness is something you get to eventually, after the foundation is repoured. What I felt was more like the specific relief of a man who has been watching a structure he built lean slowly for years and has finally found the courage to shore it up. The months that followed were not easy, and I was not supposed to know the details. But Joyce kept me informed because I asked her to, and because Joyce had known me long enough to understand that being kept informed was not the same as interfering. He got a call from a tenant at 11:30 on a Tuesday night about a leaking pipe under the kitchen sink. He was there in 20 minutes with a wrench and a flashlight. Joyce told me he stayed until 2 in the morning until it was fixed. Not because he knew how to fix it, because he didn't, not yet, but because he called an emergency plumber and waited with the tenant, an elderly woman named Mrs. Kowalski, who had lived in the building for 11 years, until the work was done and she felt safe enough to sleep. He had to evict a tenant in September, a young man who had stopped paying rent, and had also, it turned out, been subletting to 3 other people without disclosure. Michael handled it legally, carefully, the way Joyce had shown him, but I heard through her that it cost him a week of sleep. He told her he kept thinking about where the guy was going to go. That was the right thing to lose sleep over. I did not tell him that directly, but I noted it. In October, he called me for the first time since the gala, not to talk about the job, to ask me about the Bellamy Center project, specifically how I had handled a zoning dispute that had held up the build for 8 months in 1998. We talked for an hour. We talked about concrete and permits and the particular obstinacy of the city's building department. We did not talk about Victoria, who had ended the engagement in June, or about Randall Ashworth, whose foundation had quietly settled with the AG's office in August for a restructuring agreement and a set of oversight requirements that effectively ended his control over the board. Michael did not say, "I told you so" about Randall. He did not have to. Some lessons arrive already annotated. In March, 11 months after I had driven past his building in the heat, I pulled up to the address and parked and went up the front steps and knocked. He answered the door in the same boots I had seen him wearing on the first day, which were now appropriately broken in, and he looked at me with an expression that had something in it I had not seen on his face in years. It was the expression of someone who had learned what they were made of and had not, upon learning it, been entirely disappointed. "Come in," he said. "I just made coffee." His apartment was small. He had furnished it simply: a couch, a kitchen table with 2 chairs, a shelf of books. The window that looked out over the street was drafty, and he had taped weather stripping around the frame himself, inexpertly but adequately. We sat at the kitchen table with our coffee. I had a folder with me. "Hargrove Property Management," I said. I set the folder in front of him. "I am restructuring it. Joyce is retiring in June. I need someone to run the operation, not as a favor, not as an inheritance. As a job that you will earn on the basis of the 11 months you have already put in and the performance reviews Joyce has given me every month since July." He looked at the folder. He did not open it immediately. "It is entry-level management," I said. "You will oversee the 4 properties. You will report to me on a weekly basis. The salary is real, but it is not investment banking money. You will work up from there based on results." He picked up the folder. He opened it. He read it the way he had learned to read things in the last 11 months, carefully, from the beginning, without skipping to the end. "There is a clause," he said. "There is always a clause," I said. "Read it." He read it. "Associate agrees to complete a full year in the role before any discussion of equity or advancement occurs." He looked up. "You want to make sure I stay. I want to make sure you understand that building something takes longer than it looks from the outside," I said. "I want to make sure you have the patience for it." He looked back at the folder. He looked at the coffee cup in his hand. He looked at the weather stripping on the window. "I broke 11 windows on the Bellamy Center job," I said, "in one afternoon. I was trying to go fast on a section that needed to be done slow. Pete Cerrone told me I was going to pay for those windows out of my own pocket, and I did. $240. In 1989, that was a significant $240. He waited. "That is the job," I said. "You break windows. You pay for the windows. You learn not to go fast on sections that need to be done slow. And if you do that long enough, if you pay attention, and you do not look for shortcuts, and you respect the people who depend on what you are building to keep them dry and warm, then eventually you are not just a building manager. You are a builder." He put the folder down and reached across the table and held out his hand. Not the handshake he had been practicing in good rooms for the last several years. The firm, practiced, calibrated version. Just his hand. Open. I took it. His palm was rough. Not as rough as mine. Not yet. But he had been working with them, and it showed. We shook hands across a kitchen table in a one-bedroom apartment in a building I owned on the north side of Chicago, and neither of us said anything for a moment because there was nothing left that needed saying. Outside, the March wind was moving down the street with the particular purpose of Chicago wind, and the building held against it the way it always had, the way I had always made sure it would, because that is what you do when you build something worth keeping. You make sure the foundation is right. You make sure it will stand.